Actually, the main problem in Telangana is that, I don't know, it may be in other places also, is that most people think that, well, there are many misconceptions. One misconception that people have is that they think that transgender people are intersex people, like mix up the two. So intersex people are people who are born with bodies that are not classifiable by society and by medical establishments as male or female. Trans people some intersex people may be transgender identified. That is to say, they may be identified in some way that when society and medical establishment give them a gender at birth, they may, when they grow up, not identify with that gender. In which case, intersex people can also be transgender. But all transgender people are not intersex. Many transgender people have bodies which are unambiguously, that is without any confusion, classified as male or female at birth, but they don't identify with that gender. As they grow up, they find that they are not identified with the gender they were assigned at birth. So that is the struggle of transgender people. The problem is that people who are cisgender, that is to say they are not transgender, they identify with the gender they have been given at birth. It's very difficult for them to understand what trans people go through. It's very difficult for them to understand why somebody would not identify with the gender that they've been given at birth. And then the thought experiment that what I ask cisgender people to do is, okay, suppose you're identified as male. Imagine that tomorrow you wake up and your body, you wake up tomorrow and you find that you have a female body. How would you feel, right? Why is it that, if you are a male identified person in a female body, will you just be able to say, okay, fine, my body has changed and go along with it? Or will you find that the entire social and gendered structure that you've been brought up with is suddenly clashing with the body that you find that you're inhabiting? So I think that's the only way to give cisgender people an understanding of what transgender people go through. That is, imagine you are identified in some way and then your body suddenly changes. How would you deal with that body? So most of what transgender people go through is a struggle with our own bodies. That is to say, this is not the body that seems to match what, how we think of our own bodies. It's mostly not some kind of larger public statement about society or anything else. It is just a discomfort that we have with our own bodies. That is the private struggle of every transgender person. Unfortunately, society creates a public struggle as well by saying that if your body in some way, when society is inspecting you up and down, does not match with how you seem to identify or how your gestures or the way you dress, then society creates even more problems, and those are the problems which we call transphobia. When society says that you look like you should be this gender to me, but you are behaving a different way, you are dressing a different way, or you identify as male but I will still call you female because I think your body looks female, that is transphobia. Ending transphobia is very simple. You don't know by looking at somebody how they identify their gender. So just ask them, and then whatever they say, respect it. As far as I can tell, that's a simple way to deal with transphobia. What do you feel?
Yes, it is perhaps difficult for some people, but I think more than being difficult, it's also lack of willingness to want to understand
Transgender people.
Understand transgender people, and particularly in the corporate elite spaces where people are dealing with complex issues. They're already dealing with a lot of complex issues. The corporate space that I inhabit isn't a very simple space, so it's not that they're not used to complex issues. They are required. Problem solving is a key skill that they need, and it is so not that complex that it can't be understood. But I think more than finding it difficult, it is the disrespect that's deeply entrenched in in people within society. That said, there's also this thing about when a trans person were to speak of her, a trans woman were to identify herself as trans, there are people who deliberately address the trans person by the name that was assigned to that person at birth, and that's deliberately done. And I have had enough and more instances when people have asked me, so have you actually undergone sexual reassignment surgery? Have you declared it on paper? And I think that's just nobody's business other than mine. And my word needs to be the final word as far as my gender identity is concerned. This is something that people need to understand, that the person's word is the last word. And also for those, in my case, where I thought for a very long time that I was gay, and then over the past 3 to 4 years I realized that it was just not a difference of sexuality, but also a difference of gender identity. I have had people within the LGBT community tell me that I am doing this because I just wish to be different from gay people. It's not that I wish to be different from gay people, I think I am different from gay people. Similarly, while I can't speak on behalf of anybody else, there are similar issues, wars that I've heard from other constituencies within the trans-identified folks, as trans boys, trans men, female to male, people who've transitioned from female to male and male to female. So, as you rightly said, the person's word needs to be the final word, and that word, the person is well within his or her rights to change that word at any point of time. So a person who's earlier identified himself or herself as gay is well within his or her rights to think differently.
My views are something I think quite similar with you, Bitu. But I can narrate this in terms of Hijra-oriented, as I'm a Hijra-oriented trans person. I can narrate you in their language I want to narrate. Like, I feel that patriarchal thinking in the society that leads a lot to the transphobia. For example, the hijras and the hijra trans-oriented trans women, whenever they got emasculated or get an SRS, they feel like that means they were guided by the same patriarchal thinking, like a woman must be like this. They must be wrapped. They will be wrapped under by the cultural norms and the religious norms of the society or the community surrounded by them. So they are guided by the environment, and this was happening from long times. And they in this journey they may also they never take back to discriminate or stigmatize the own community also in two instances. Like, for example, if a emasculated trans woman is there, so she herself want to elite herself from the community, transgender Hijra community, from the other trans non-emasculated people, like. So this thinking, actual thinking, has came from the patriarchal thinking that the women should be like this, with the norms, which the whole society is guided like women must be like this, she must be dressed up like this, she must behave like this, she must eat like this, and she must be like this only. Apart from this, if she has done anything, something different, or like she'll be attacked by everyone, like religiously she'll be attacked and everything, like. So the same thing happens with the community, because the community is a part of the society and guided by the cultural and religious norms of the society. So they attach with these things, the patriarchal things with them, and they follow that, and which leads them to the transphobic situations in many cases. Like, So what I feel is this parallel stigma or transphobia within the community has to be addressed at some or the other point. So you need so which can minimize the stigma at the community level, which can increase the community thing within the community on a larger spectrum, and can bind the community to fight against the stigma in the society.
Yeah.
That's what I feel.
Yeah, I feel that the major burden of changing transphobia is not, it's not just about, as you say, changing transphobia. It's about fighting this patriarchy, which in the context of India is a very Brahminical kind of patriarchy at every level. And it's that kind of Brahminical patriarchy which gives some people the idea that they can decide how other people should be. You know, like, I will decide who you are, I will decide what occupation you should do. You know, the way in which the Hijra community is systematically banned from entry into any occupation other than sex work and begging. All these are part of the way in which Brahminical patriarchy imposes a hierarchy of occupations, of labor, and of permissions on everybody else. And everybody seems to agree that if people decide that they are not bound by those rules, that there has to be some kind of punishment. And everybody seems to agree, the larger society seems to agree on that. The main thing that we want to say in this context as trans people who are opposing the entire system of patriarchy, of Brahminical patriarchy, is that we are not the only people who are oppressed by this system. Certainly all women and all gender minorities are oppressed by this system. All oppressed castes are oppressed by the same system. And we feel that there is a united kind of fight against this system that should be waged by all of us in solidarity. And that goes in terms of exposing and fighting any Brahminism and patriarchal tendencies within the transgender community, and also to collectively fighting these tendencies within us as we form, so that our alliances are meaningful and that they are not just in name. But then that larger fight has to be fought in solidarity, in some meaningful solidarity against the system of Brahminical patriarchy.
Yeah, I agree with you. Apart from that, not only Brahminical, even
classes?
various other religious,
Go on.
various other religions which has flourished in India also have the impact of this Brahmanism, because the people who are actually converted or the original things, they have the environment influence or within themselves or something, and they are guided by this patriarchal thinking like that. So no religion is different from patriarchy, because patriarchy is there embedded in every religion, irrespective of caste, creed and so. Yeah, I agree with you. So we need to address this at a larger level, but starting from the smaller level within the community. So we need to take we need to sensitize the parallel communities. Like if we say the trans community has to should be desensitize the gay community, like lesbian community, and vice versa also regarding this issue, so that we get a equal solidarity and fight.
Onwards.
Also, we have spoken about this a lot. I mean, the existing transphobia within the LGBT community, especially in India, because the visible transgender community is the Hijra community, and the kind of Hijra phobia we see within the LGBT community. How do you all think we should address that? Because exceedingly the movement, the LGBT movement, is an elite movement, at least turning out, has been, and is, an elite movement, where a lot of trans people are being sidelined for obvious reasons. Do you all think it's a major problem, and how do you all think we should address it?
I mean, the way I see it very much is that it's mostly an elite gay male phenomenon, where these are people who are gay, that sexuality is something that they can choose to closet because it's not like gender identity, something which is obvious. And that the fact that they come from, they have only one access of disprivilege in some sense, which is being gay, but in other ways they are elite, they are overwhelmingly savarna and male identified. That makes their sort of complete inability to see how oppressive they are within the LGBT movement. It's a very sort of formidable opposition. That said, we have in some sense facts on our side when we say that the what's called the LGBT movement has existed for years as the very visible struggle of the Hijra community,
Of
for
trans
which
people.
Hijra community has also paid a huge price. The Hijra community as a trans community, in fact in the working class LGBT community, working class gay men don't use the word gay, they use the word koti, and kotis are also organized around the Hijra community. That is to say, the Hijra community is the center of the grassroots, unfunded, non-NGO, non-English speaking movement that has existed for years and for centuries, which all of us know. But, and to the extent that people identify as gay, identify as openly gay, with various degrees of femininity which make them more and more unable to pretend that they are straight men, right, while secretly having relationships with other people, the more and more open they are about their gender identity and sexuality, the more they join the community which is centered around the Hijra community. So that is the organizing structure which has existed for many years, and that is the working class LGBT movement. The fact that when the elite LGBT movement makes statements like the gay movement in India has existed for the last 10 years, they are being exactly like, they are thinking with this exact colonial mentality that the British came with when they would say, oh, this species of insect has been discovered for the first time in 1880. Everything that exists over here we have known about, and the Adivasis who've lived in the forest have known about these for years. But then the first time it is codified in English, it suddenly becomes a movement. So just because there is a section of English-speaking people who have just realized that they are gay and who have just realized that there is some international English-speaking networking across Facebook, does not mean that the movement started with their birth or started with their ability to parlay their gay identity for immense amounts of international funding. The movement has existed long before them. It has always been trans-led. It has always been Hijra-centric in India, the working class movement. And whether or not they think that they have started some new LGBT movement or not is irrelevant to us. We will just assert that the working class movements have always existed, they continue to exist, and they happen to be focused around the Hijra community in this particular socio-economic context. And for them to ignore that is just one of many examples of their own classism and casteism when it comes to thinking that they somehow represent the LGBT community.
Anything else?
Okay, I don't know whether you can say. See, actually, one is about, while you are discussing about LGBT and trans, how do you differentiate socially and politically also? Though you have been saying the crowd between them, but somewhere I find there is more to it. So that could you explain the social, political nature of the entire trans in itself and the LGBT?
Or at least talk about, I think the discourse on gender minorities and sexual minorities always sort of collide, and people don't clearly talk about what the difference is, right? People end up equating both. So if we all could talk about,
So one adding to that is, one is, for example, a trans, he has to leave his entire family and come out and society and living in one particular area, no money, only economic, no like that. Could you make the audience clear about these things, or also how to look when they shouldn't just randomly see, oh, lesbian, gay, trans.
Right.
So that, could you differentiate that?
Yeah. Honestly, in my understanding is not. It's not. I mean, there are two things here. One is the role that caste and class play in defining LGBT identities, and the other is the question of what it means to be trans versus not trans. So I'll come to the second question first, because it's the primary question you're asking. See, I don't think, I mean, different people may have different views about this, but I think that there are many people who identify very strongly as transgender, and there are several other people who, at least in the working class communities, are maybe Koti identified, for example, who identify to varying degrees of being transgender. The more trans you are, the more open you are forced to be. So the more trans you are, the more likely it is that is, if your behavior is somehow not conforming or not according to the gender you are supposed to have been assigned at birth, then your family figures out very soon. Everybody figures out. The entire neighborhood figures out. And if you're working class, then you don't even have you don't have privacy with which to pretend to close off a room to a door and have an entire room to yourself where you can dress up in clothes that you like. Everything that you live, if you are working class in India, is lived in front of everybody. So your privacy does not exist. So it's up to your community whether they accept you or not. There is a myth that working class people are not accepted in their homes. That's not true. I know several working class trans men and trans women who are accepted in their homes. But the point is, if you're not accepted, it comes out in the open very soon. So class and trans identity both play a role in the actual oppression you face as a transgender person. That is to say, if you happen to live in a house which is not going to accept it, the poorer you are, the more quickly it's going to come in the open, and the more visibly transgender you are, the more obviously your behavior is not in accordance with your assigned gender at birth, the quicker you will be kicked out of the house if your family happens to not accept you. I have not seen, in my experience, it's not that elite families accept their parents, their children, their trans children more. On the other hand, I found the majority of my friends who are accepted by their families are working class, because their families see them this way all their lives, and they don't have that Brahminical thinking which a lot of elite parents have. If my kid is like this, everybody's going to see my kid, people will say things about me, shame to the family. All of those are very Brahminical notions. So I found that a lot of working class families who come from either non-Brahmin or anti-Brahmin backgrounds have a stronger acceptance within their family. But if you are not accepted by your family, then if you're working class and if you're trans, then it's a very potent combination. Typically, you have to leave your home. Once you leave your home, there is no job, there's no work, there's no home, there's nobody who will take you in other than other transgender people. And so both of these things play a strong role in how you are treated by society. Most people, therefore, are reduced to becoming, they are only allowed to beg. That's the only job that most people have, or do sex work. So that is the lived reality of most trans people who have been kicked out of their homes, regardless of the background that they come from. But if they come from a background with certain privileges, then sometimes they are able to use those privileges to have a less difficult life as a transgender person. In my case, for example, my caste and class privileges almost entirely, completely make up for the fact that I am transgender identified. But that's not true for people who don't have the same caste and class privileges. So it's important for me to represent the fact that being transgender is not just, your lived difficulties being a transgender person are not just about being transgender. They're also about how trans identified you are, and how many caste and class based oppressions you face in society. If I had, with all this caste and class privilege, I were to decide to change my name, my legal name on some legal documents, most likely I would not be able to even retain the job I have now, because of the fact that your certificates are in a different gender, your identities in another gender. How is anyone going to hire you? So these are some of the kinds of problems that even elite trans people face. There are huge problems with just getting whatever certificates and so on they've picked up through class and caste privilege recognized by society, so that they can even use them in order to have a better, a less difficult existence as trans people. But in terms of LGBT, as I said, within the working class movement, these are the words LGBT we in some sense find are problematic because they're all English words and they come from a particular framework where L, G, B and T are defined as very different from one another. There's a lot of transphobia in the Western gay discourse which sets up these categories of lesbian, gay, bi and trans, where gay people are extremely conditioned to identify as not trans. There's intense transphobia in the gay community, where gay men feel like they have to be hyper masculine and mask their femininity so that they can delineate themselves as gay but not trans. And likewise in lesbian, especially elite lesbian circles, people who identify as lesbian because they've heard that word in English is the first word that they've heard that describes themselves. But in the working class communities where there aren't these kinds of Western transphobic LGBT categories, everything is just organically organized around the trans communities because the trans communities are the most visible. They're the people who, having run away from home, have run away from home the earliest because they've been pushed out of home earliest because their gender identity has been so visible and non-conforming with their assigned gender. So trans communities have left homes and created alternative structures and pioneered the working class LGBT movement. And around them, people who are gay, that is to say Koti identified, people who are lesbian identified, trans men, butch lesbians, have all sort of variously gravitated around that trans movement. The Hijra movement has been the organizing center where when trans friends of mine have run away from their homes in Warangal, that is a trans man and his partner who identifies as a lesbian, and they ran away from their homes in Warangal, it was Gautami Guru in Warangal who helped find them a place to run away to. So in the working class communities, whether somebody is lesbian identified, or identified along the lines of what one would call lesbian or gay or bi, the organizing center has always been the working class trans community. They are the people who have been historically organized and who have created that kind of.
Yeah.
Hey.
Apart from that, what I feel, the main Hijra-oriented trans women, if there is a lot of stigma and the social acceptance, if they want to sustain along with their families and their parents, kith and kins, then they have to take support of again a religion or a culture or a thing which is stamped as a normal thing by surroundings. Like, for example, a few trans women, they themselves identify as a Shiva Shaktis. What they say, they have taken the help of the religion so that they express their transgenderism as well, and also they very comfortably stay along with their families and their neighbors and everyone.
Right.
But lot of atrocities happen with the Shiva Shaktis, which they can never rise in life.
Right.
So, if being a Shiva Shakti, you have raised any question that these atrocities happen with me or this harassment has happened with me, then people try to question them again that you are a God person. How can a trouble can come to you like thing? Another example is like there are also Muslim transgender women who maximum they spend their they choose their profession as a professional dancers from old city like Hyderabad. So they are forced to choose this option because that religion never accept anything like begging or sex work. You can beg, but being a transgender you can't beg, because being a transgender woman, you are biologically male and you need to fulfill all the responsibilities of a son, a male one. So they choose their option like, if they have forced to choose to be a dancer, then lot of atrocities happens with these dancers also. Whenever they go to a wedding or a marriage, they dance, and after the marriage lot of people harass them and lot of atrocities happen with them, but they can't complain over that. So what I feel is, people means being a minority community, if you want to sustain along with your parents and all your environment, all your neighbors and kith and kins, if you have taken the support of any religion or something else, then also atrocities are very near to you, they'll follow you like a shadow. You are not like that. You are away from all these things.
The term LGBT is a largely Western construct, and I'm assuming that post-World War, with quite a few of our um, our own folks settling down in the US and having been exposed to the LGBT discourse and you know, movement, it's just been imported. I'm not saying that gender identities have been imported or sexuality has, but the terminology has been imported because we are much more than LGBT. It's just not divided into 4 quadrants, nor is it 5 or 6, because it's a huge spectrum. The Shiv Shaktis that you just spoke of, there are Mangalmukhis, there are Yoginis, there are Joktas, I mean, it's a huge wide spectrum, and just fitting them all into these 4 quadrants or 5 quadrants or 6 quadrants is by itself a huge disservice to the movement and discourse. That apart, you also spoke of trans women who are made to live in a certain way, and if you recollect, some time ago we spoke of trans women who are transgender, whose gender identity is trans, but whose sexuality is different, in the sense they are not attracted to men, they're sexually attracted to women, and they do come under some level of they get stigmatized within the community, as their sexuality is quite not in conformity with what the ecosystem, the trans ecosystem, whether if they are hijra, the Haveli hijras or the hijras who are non-Haveli, doesn't quite fall in conformity with that, and they come under a certain degree of stigma. That said, yes, there's a huge chasm between the trans identified groups, the larger transgender community, and cisgendered queer people. And while I'm using the word cisgendered, in my experience, and I'm not generalizing, but I think it's absolutely okay for me to state what appears to be a fact to me from my frame of reference. It's quite not even the cisgendered queer people, it's just the cisgendered gay men. Largely just the cisgendered gay men who use words like LGBT, but the T and the L and even perhaps the B is just tokenism. It's just tokenism. So there are spaces that we've ended up inhabiting, but we don't. There are spaces which have tried to include us, which call themselves LGBT, but then the decision making is mostly done by a privileged few cisgendered gay boys. So I don't know how that becomes queer, I don't know how that becomes LGBT, where there's again a hierarchy of decision making is done by gay boys, cisgendered gay boys or gay men, while implementation and running around in the labor work, it's a brilliant capitalist model where the alpha male identities decide and they delegate, while the other gender identities just execute. I mean, it's like the queen ant and the army of labor ants. So I don't think it's quite LGBT. I think it should just be called the gay movement, which it really is.
Yeah, it is. And coming to the social and political background or the influence on transgender community, what I feel is just instead of talking about social background, we should talk about social inclusion at a larger level. You are not an isolated, being a transgender, you are not an isolated person, and you can be, you must be a part of the society also. But suppose you think you got the identity, you got the ration card, Aadhaar card, bank account, and everything else. But what about the stigma sustaining around on a larger basis? What about the corruption sustaining around on a larger basis? If you need an employment in India where corruption is institutionalized, the job is a myth for the transgender, what I feel. If you are a visible transgender in the society, like jobs are guided by either caste or money or position or something by XYZ which is related to the corruption at a larger level. So instead of talking about social background, we from at a micro and macro level, we need to talk about and discuss at various forums about the social inclusion of the transgenders, social and political inclusion of the transgenders. For example, if a transgender woman has contested in an election, we have seen also a few of our have contested. You can be elected if that area is majorly populated by trans women or some political influence is there. But if it is an isolated situation, the stigma sustaining around will never allow you to be coming with a with flying colors, like what I feel. So this stigma, we need to concentrate and we need to hit at that point at a right direction, so that we make this social inclusion from small level to bigger level. That's what I feel.
Also, if I could just add, Vaijayanti brought up the question of how, the question of capitalism, and I mean history shows us very clearly how capitalism has managed or movements, identity movements, and that is clearly happening in India too with the corporatization of the gay movement. Do you see that as a threat to the trans movement, at least to the movement that post Nalsa, there has been an increase in a lot of transgenders asserting themselves, at least on visibly they're coming out in mainstream media. Do you think this capitalism, like it has had an effect on a lot of identity movements, will have an effect on this movement too?
I don't think capitalism is opposed to identity movements. I think capitalism actually likes identity movements to some extent, which is why certain kinds of trans initiatives are heavily funded. The important thing for the objective for capitalism is there's only one objective in the context of capitalism, right, which is making money. So within that context, transgenders can be used, right? Transgenders are in some sense a labor force who are idle, and transgenders can be used. But the important thing is to not have people, be united in or collective in struggle in any way, because capitalism depends heavily on making people think that everybody is an individual who must think for themselves and not think collectively. So the main threat that we face from capitalism is not the fact that they are opposed to identities, but the fact that capitalism promotes a very particular kind of dominant culture, which then tries to convince everybody that they're individuals in this world, tries to convince everybody that if they're not making it in this world, it is not because of the socio-cultural factors that are at play, whether it be caste or whether it be gender, but rather that the lot that you're facing in life is just because of some vague notion, undefined notion of merit, or that it's your luck, or things that cannot be controlled, things that cannot be fought. Within the context of not capitalism per se, but hegemony in general, the idea is that you cannot fight, that you cannot change things, and that you just have to accept the system and deal with it as an individual. So that, I think, individualism is always something that we have to fight. Within the trans movement, we have to fight it a lot, because capitalism within the context of capitalism, they're very friendly towards funding trans movements, as long as those movements don't go anywhere in terms of collective struggle.
Which is why largely the LGBT movement has been reduced to an anti-HIV movement. Right?
Exactly. So you focus on very specific things, but you don't focus on the notion of collective struggle. The other thing is that, I agree about social inclusion, I agree about stigma specifically, but when it comes to social inclusion, I'm not so sure, in the sense that different people will have different perspectives on this. My perspective is just that I don't know if I want to be included in this particular society, right? I think I would rather, because I have a vantage point of seeing how unfair this society is as a trans person, I'd rather question society and question whether it has to be organized this way, right? And question a lot of the frameworks that oppress us, the framework of patriarchy, the framework of Brahmanism. I'm not interested in, in asking other people for inclusion. Rather, I'm interested in educating other people on how much the system has oppressed us, and how much from my position I can see that the same system is oppressing them. And I would rather forge those, that collective, struggle with all of the people who are oppressed by the system to change the things about the system that are messed up, or to create a new system where we are not just, having to oppose the system all the time, but where we even have the chance to create something new, to think about what that new system will be like. That is the kind of thing that we need to collectively do.
So historically, where can I find trans? In the sense, for example, when some time back when you're talking about this, I was remembering the Sadi system, Jogini. There is historically a place in literature, various places I can find. So the trans also must have some historical way, how they were then, how the society, how they were written, spoken. So is there any...
Yeah, if you're talking of collectivization of trans people living as a sub-society, as a subaltern group, I'm not sure if it can go deep back into history, that I'm not sure. But as individuals, yes, they go deep back into very... there are lots of mythological narratives of individuals, but as a collective, as a subaltern group, I'm not very sure if it's...
I think as most subaltern groups, we've never really written our own histories, or if they've been written, they've not been institutionalized, right? It's entirely possible that trans people have written about themselves. The trans people have been written about. The existence of hijras as a community has been written about, talked about, mentioned historically. But very little has been defined by the transgender community.
Oh, you were saying during the Nizam's period, you were saying some time back.
Right.
So that...
in the Nizam's period,
I was thinking whether like a witchcraft.
Yeah.
Like that, whether they treated in villages and they were beaten with that.
Not witchcraft. They used to be the Unani medicine, medical practitioner who used to work for the queens.
Trans.
Yeah, trans people used to work for queens historically in Hyderabad.
In Hyderabad.
So, but one notion was there, like Nizam used to castrate them without their permission.
Consent.
Without their consent.
Were they trans then, or was
No,
just,
we can't treat them as a trans because that is where they use that.
That's why they use the word eunuch.
That's
That's where the use of that word is.
So he used to use them for a safeguard of the princess, and also practicing of Unani medicine, so that if they get anything, they can cure them.
So it's not sure whether they are
trans or
not.
No,
Yeah.
we don't know what their identities are.
So right now in literature or even in European literatures, English literatures, anyway, can I find...
There's a very nice book written by Leslie Feinberg called Transgender Liberation. I would suggest that anybody who can should read that book, because Leslie is a trans man, also a very fiery... he recently passed away, but he fought against the structures of capitalism and race and gender for many years. And Transgender Liberation is a book, a little bit Eurocentric, I mean, because he's from the US, but where he has researched the role that transgender people have played in liberation struggles around the world. And it's very interesting. He's documented many struggles in, for example, Europe, peasant struggles, right? So farmer struggles, where people used to dress, where men, largely men, used to dress as women and go into battle to fight. Where Leslie has researched the use of so for example Joan of Arc as a transgender hero, discussed various other people who have been legendary fighters in battle who were transgender identified. And Leslie has also looked into sort of cultures around the world where there have been legendary transgender people. So that's one of the books that was one of the few books where a transgender person has tried to research the historical legacy of transgenders. And I think it's a very
Apart from
useful
that,
book to start
every
from.
Indian history have the examples of trans person who will always be a friend of a queen or a princess, like so.
There are many myths, and certainly within the community, within the trans community, we have oral histories that these gharanas have, and
You have
those
oral
have been
histories?
for years and years. But I don't think there's much written. There might be, but it will not be so easy to
known as
find.
calling.
Yeah.
We need to know.
Yeah.
So are my students.
So వచ్చేసిన బయలుదేరా
మేము బయలుదేరాము. హలో
Tuchira?